On the day of Ashura, since we are in the season, you read this story and then you start to pick these things just to understand the mindset of those people. Historians tell us that one of the companions of Imam Hossein was getting ready, sorting himself out, looking good, dressing well so he can go to battle. But these guys, right, these guys knew they are with the Imam of the time, who has been betrayed by a lot of people. They are about to be killed. They are, you would think the worst time in the whole process is when you know you've lost, but the loss hasn't actually happened, right? It's like before the time runs out in a match, if you follow sports, like the last maybe 30 seconds. When you know you will never change the result, but it hasn't ended. That's terrible. Once it's ended, it's like, okay, it's done now. You can move on. But before it happens, that anticipation is really bad. This guy is dressing up and looking good to go to battle. Habib speaks to him and says, I see that you're getting ready, that you're laughing. And they're laughing, both of them, kind of joking and laughing. And he says, well, why wouldn't I be happy? It's only a few moments, it's a short period of time, and I'll be in heaven. Why wouldn't I be happy? Surely, if you look at it that way, it's a good thing. But this doesn't mean they don't do the work, they don't struggle, they don't try hard. And there are so many examples like these where you see this kind of mindset. You see Ahlul Bayt when things are going very well on the upswing, they are happy and content and controlled. And when things go really bad, they are happy and content. So when we say this life is not a good life for the believer, we don't mean it should be horrible. We mean there is something much better that comes after the Day of Judgment. This can be great, but there can be something infinitely better. Why am I saying this? Because we often, when you talk to people going through difficulties, they say, well, why should a child have a disease? Why should a loved one who served the community all their life die of a horrible disease? We've been praying for such a long time and nothing happened. Why? This doesn't seem to make sense. Good people should not suffer, bad people should suffer. How come bad people don't suffer and good people suffer? And in saying this, we're missing the whole point. The biggest and the most important blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given each and every one of us is the chance to take the exam. That's what's the most significant. We weren't created, we were nothing, right? You were in a position of nothingness. This conversion, this chance to be elevated is a huge blessing. When you apply for a job and you get shortlisted for interview, do you get sad? Do you say, I wish they rejected me? Why did they shortlist me for interview? What they're doing is they're giving you a chance to perform, a chance to succeed, a chance to prove yourself. That's what they're doing. Same when you apply and you get shortlisted to go and, compete in the Olympics. How much of an honor is that? To compete in the Olympics? Well, you might lose, but it's a chance to take part. That's so valuable. And when it comes to the chance for eternal happiness, that's the biggest blessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Just by putting us here, this is a huge, huge blessing. But He hasn't stopped here, He's actually gone further. He says, I will give you a set of guidance and I'll put you under time conditions. You will have a period of time. Whatever you do good, I'll multiply it by 10. Whatever you do bad, that's it, 1 for 1, justice. You do good, I'll multiply it by 10. Where do we get such offers? Seriously, who gives us these offers? It's a chance to do something. It's a chance to be elevated, to make a difference. And so in Islam, we do not, the moment you start asking questions, why should a good person suffer? You're thinking, this is one of the biases that I talked about called narrow framing. You're thinking of this life. You're not thinking what happens beyond this life. You're thinking death is an end. It's a failure. It's a bad thing. In which case, of course, if somebody good suffers, that's a loss. But if the suffering is an opportunity to be rewarded, then it's a good thing. It's all proportionate. Essentially, if I was to put it slightly differently, life is an adaptive test. Do you know what an adaptive test is? An adaptive test is when the questions change in difficulty depending how well you perform. GMAT test is an example of which. So this is not standard test where you get 20 questions, 1 point per question. If you get correct, if you get it wrong, it's 0 and that's it. It's not that. This is a question that's computer-based usually nowadays, which changes the difficulty of the question depending how well you perform, right? So if you get a hard question correctly, you get a huge reward. If you get a hard question wrong, you get a small punishment because it was a hard question. If you get an easy question correctly, you get a small reward. If you get an easy question wrong, you get a large punishment. And as you perform well, questions become harder and harder. As you perform badly, questions become easier and easier. And after a while, it stabilizes. That's your level. So you might need, the exam might be, I don't know, composed of 50 questions, but by question number 30, you've probably reached your level. If you did really well early on, they give you harder and harder and harder questions until you reach your level where you start to get half right, half wrong. You stabilize, and that's where you are. So actually, one of the funny things, GMAT is an exam that a lot of people do, and a lot of people who do really well leave thinking horrible. Leave thinking they have screwed it up, they have done really badly. Because they've had such hard questions that they struggled with. So when they leave, they think they've done badly, and then they get the result, and they're in the top 2%, 1% of the population. And those who think it was easy actually get very bad results. Because it was adaptive. If it was easy, it means you've been getting so many questions wrong. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed this life. It's adaptive. Every time you get a tough exam, it really means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a chance to get a high reward if you get it right, a small punishment if you get it wrong. Essentially, get worried if your life is too easy. That's when you should get worried, because you're not being given the opportunity. And so, then let's go back to the original question. Why would good people suffer? Maybe because they are good people. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to take them from level million to level trillion. It's just a chance for them to perform. And how many times, sometimes we just don't look at the consequences, the externalities of what happened. We look at this person who's really good, they suffered. And they suffered and they died. Well, they, on the day of judgment, will get rewarded for all of that. Their family got the chance to be patient and get elevated. Their grandchildren got inspired to go and study science and make a difference to humanity. And their neighbors did something else. And this illness could have transformed the community sometimes. We don't see that. We just narrow framing, focus on this particular thing. Why was it so bad? And this is very important for us as believers. As followers of Ahlul Bayt, this is a chance to do something. And I'm kind of saying this, and I want to tell you this as a matter of responsibility. Every time I go to Najaf, I go and visit the Maraji' and get blessed with their advice, ask them. So I ask them, if it happens to be time before Muharram, I ask them, what would you like me to say? What would you like me to convey as a message? And on multiple occasions, at least twice, Ayatollah al-Sayyid Sistani tells me, when you go to the West, tell our young men and women to aim for the top, to be the best in whatever field they want. Tell them they should aim to be the best scientists, the best engineers, the best professors. Tell them that Ahlul Bayt want to be proud of their followers. That Ahlul Bayt put the foundations of knowledge, not just religious knowledge, other knowledge. That they should take the opportunity. He tells me that they need to realize they have opportunities which others don't have. Opportunities for the best possible education, perhaps. Opportunities to learn and make a difference, to improve humanity, and to improve, by association, the prospects of other followers of Ahlul Bayt and the reputation of Islam. it's a chance to go through difficult exams and to make a difference. And with the opportunity comes the responsibility. And we need to make this very clear in our minds. No opportunity comes without responsibility. And no responsibility comes without opportunity. It's always, here is something you can do, and here is the monitoring that would follow with it. That's how justice works. And so when we look at how Islam approached these things, it starts to make sense that there are people who lived lives that were very good and people who lived lives that were very difficult, people who sacrificed and suffered seemingly and people who didn't suffer, and all of it does not shake the beliefs and the mindset of those believers. I told you the story of Imam al-Kadhim, who spent years, long years in prisons, horrible prisons. And he knows he's the Imam of the time, and he knows his position in society. In prison, so this guy, one of the guards, he brings him, he was kept in this little place, kind of dug deep down, and he sees him from the very top. He tells him, do you see that piece of cloth on the ground? Cloth on the ground? He says, yes, I can see that piece of cloth. It's just a piece of cloth. He says, no, this is not a piece of cloth. This is my prisoner. This is Musa al-Kadhim, my prisoner. What he does, he wakes up, he performs his wudu, and he starts praying, and he's like this until the end of the day. That's what he looks like. And one of the guards says, I used to hear him repeatedly say that, oh Lord, you know that I asked you to give me an opportunity to worship. Now that you've done, thank you. Because now I can dedicate my time to worship, because I understand the opportunity that you have given me. And so they weren't downbeat, they weren't unhappy, they didn't think life is horrible. They thought, put me at the top of socioeconomic curve, I will use my money and status to make a difference. Put me at the bottom, I'll work hard. It's always working hard, and it's always being upbeat and happy and optimistic and looking forward. Knowing that beyond, by the end of the exam, it will be even better. So comparatively, this is not as good, but not necessarily bad. And you see those who have been trained by Ahlul Bayt, how Islam completely changed this. And I gave the example yesterday of Imam Ali going through the ups and downs of life and never losing his balance, always performing and sticking to the rules. And you see examples, today we speak of Alabbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, we speak of Salman al-Muhammadi, we speak of Ammar ibn Yasir, right? If I change the sequence, you wouldn't care, right? They're the same. Ammar ibn Yasir, Salman, Abbas, they're all really great people. Well, let's just take one step back. Abbas was one of the richest men in Mecca. The son of Abd al-Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet. Al-Abbas, in his name, was the Abbasid Empire built. In his name and his proximity to the Prophet. And he wasn't just that, he was eloquent, he was a powerful businessman, he remained, by today's standards, a billionaire post-Islam. He stayed in Mecca, even the Prophet was in Medina, they couldn't shake him. He remained the uncle of the Prophet in Mecca, in Meccan society. Extremely wealthy and powerful. And remained with the Prophet, then with Imam Ali, until he died. Salman was an old man when he joined Islam. He's of Persian origin, came from Iran, Farsi, didn't speak the language, heard through research that he was one of those people anticipating. You know, in the previous prophets, they said there will be a prophet coming afterwards by the name of Ahmed, as the Quran tells us. So he was one of the people anticipating. Allahumma salli ala. وَيُبَشِّرُكُمْ بِرَسُولٍ يَأْتِي مِنْ بَعْدِ اسْمُهُ أَحْمَدٍ. That's the kind of part he's referring to. So he heard it was the time, it was nearly the time, he headed to Mecca, searching for that prophet. That prophet happened to be Nabi Muhammad, and he joined Islam and remained with the prophet and with Imam Ali afterwards. Ammar ibn Yasir was a slave, the son of slaves. You see how lineage and social status was completely dissolved and destroyed and was replaced by a value-based system, that however much you contribute, the decisions you make will determine the outcome. It didn't mean they lived similar lives. Some lived more luxurious lives, some struggled more, but all of that will be reflected on the Day of Judgment. Eventually, when Imam Ali dealt with them on an equal footing. They counted because they made the right decisions when it mattered. And this is how the system works in Islam. So it's not, brothers and sisters, it's not acceptable for us who believe in this holistic approach, that there is this life and there's a Day of Judgment, that there are opportunities and there are challenges, for us to be complacent, for us to be downbeat, for us to feel sorry for ourselves and kind of somehow justify it, that, you know what, we are the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we should struggle because they struggled. They struggled because they were doing projects that were highly significant. They struggled because they posed a threat because of their revolutionary ideas. They could have had a great life, by the way. They earned a lot. You know, those of us who've been to Medina will see an areas called Biyar Ali, those who have seen them. These are wells that Imam Ali used to dig and get money for them, in addition to his other jobs. He had farms that he ran. He used to dig wells and charge, and then he would donate the money. They worked very hard. They earned a lot of money, actually, but they gave a lot. Imam al-Hassan, خرج من ماله مرتين. What that means is, it's in Arabic, is quite interesting. He walked out of his money, they say. Essentially, he donated everything to charity twice. He went from whatever he had to zero, earned it all again, went again to zero, earned it all again, and then 3 times he gave half his money on top of that. Essentially, he built 5 lives of earning potential. So when we say somebody who's built businesses that are successful, he's done it 5 times. In addition to his leadership role, in addition to leading armies, in addition to teaching, in addition to many other things. They didn't just sit and do nothing. In fact, they were harassed because of their potential. Imam Sadiq, Al-Baqir was Sadiq, they put the foundations of science. They created them. A guy goes to Masjid al-Kufa, those of you who have been to Masjid al-Kufa know how big it is. Somebody says in Masjid al-Kufa, which was a center of learning, by the way, Imam Sadiq wasn't in Masjid al-Kufa, he was in Medina. He says, I went there and I heard 900 sheikh, 900 professors, not students, 900 professors, they all say I was taught by Ja'far ibn Muhammad. In one location, he has 900 students who became professors. One location. How many did they have in Medina, in Damascus, and other places? They really did something. And these are our role models, brothers and sisters. So on an individual level, our thinking should be focused on taking every opportunity we have to go and make a difference. Our thinking should be that we start from whatever we've been given and to make it happen, but make it happen within the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, within the rules of the game. And then that way, if you do this, whatever the outcome in this life, it doesn't matter because you've succeeded. That's the beauty of it. It's a guarantee. Then your struggle will be rewarded, and it's a win-win-win situation. It's a great deal that we should all be very happy about and be very inspired to go and do something with it, especially when we have opportunities and we have a chance to make a difference. And how do we keep the balance between what happens for this life and what happens for our afterlife? One tool that experts talk about, they call it mental accounting. Essentially dedicate time for this world, time for the afterlife. Time for what you do, for yourself, for your family, for your friends. time for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those scholars, our scholars of behavior, of akhlaq, say you can do anything for the sake of Allah, even drink water for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and get rewarded. Because they're not mutually exclusive. You could choose the right friends to help them and to be helped by them. You will have a great life, you'll be happy with them, you'll enjoy their company, but you'll be rewarded because you've done it for the right reasons. Same with our partners, same with everything else we do in our business decisions in our life. Essentially, for us to make sure one side doesn't dominate the other, we need to keep kind of a mental check. We need to keep in mind this realization that we are here temporarily and we have another purpose. It's easy to forget. Sometimes we forget. And so we fret and we struggle and we feel the pain. We should never, if we keep reminding ourselves, one of the way to counteract these biases that I've been talking about is called availability. To make something salient in your mind, to think about it, to repeatedly talk about it. And then that way you'll remember it and you're less likely to have the bias. This is an example of availability. Keep thinking about the Day of Judgment. Keep coming to the mosque. Keep putting yourself in situations where the Day of Judgment and what happens afterwards is visible, and your biases become a lot less powerful, a lot less impactful on your own life. These are tools that we could use from science to help ourselves, and before that, before science, Islam put pathways for this to happen. No wonder we have to pray several times a day. No wonder there are things which are fixed in this schedule. You have to do them because they act as a way to train our minds, as a way to overcome biases. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created biases which are helpful most of the time. Sometimes they cause problems, and gave us tools to overcome those problems, those few occasions where we can't struggle. You see how it's a comprehensive and beautiful system? The verse I started with was from Surah Yusuf, and the brother kindly recited the beginning of Surah Yusuf. Yusuf is an example of those people who've gone up and down in life, had big struggles, and still managed to maintain that. And the beauty about the way Surah Yusuf, by the way, is one of the most beautiful pieces of literature you can read. I mean, the whole of the Quran is beautiful, but I personally sense when you read it as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to show us the art of storytelling. It's incredibly beautiful to read. It's so vivid how the story unfolds. It's like watching a movie when you read it. So it's just a beautiful thing to read just for the sake of enjoying reading it, never mind the benefits that you'll get. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of this boy. This boy who was born in a household of prophets. In a household of prophets who were leaders in their societies, who were very important in their communities. He had 11 brothers. Tough, strong brothers. In those days, it's important because they can earn money and they can provide food, and it's important for social status. You know the story. Life turned around, his brothers turned on him through jealousy and other reasons. Ended up in a well, fearing for his life. Almost killed, but wasn't killed. Sat in a well, going from that position to being almost dead. Whom does he remembers? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he's found, he's taken. Imagine that. Just try and put your mind through the eyes of a little boy. He's taken out of a well. He's alive. He's not dead. He's a slave. Same moment. Because they took him out of the well, he's now a slave. They want to sell him. Up, down. They take him. He makes it from being this boy about to be killed by his own brothers. How painful is that? To being a servant, a slave in the household of the ruler of Egypt. He grew up there. They took him like a son. And he went up and up and up in the social status in that household. Yes, he was a servant, but he was a favored, son-like servant in the household of the ruler of Egypt. During the days of the Pharaoh, this is big deal. Then he faces that challenge, the next exam. where he has to say no to a woman who is his boss, who is owner, who is beautiful, and he can get away with it and he could easily justify it. He doesn't. What does he say? Looks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ma'adallah. Innahu rabbi akrama mathwai. He doesn't say, it doesn't suit me, I'm a descendant of prophets, he doesn't say that. He says, I know where my connection is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She threatens him. He is a slave and his boss, the wife of the ruler of Egypt, threatens him. You know what that means? That means business. That means prison, death, anything. Whatever she wants, she can. He says no. He says, as the Quran puts it, Rabbi as-sijnu ahabbu ilayya mimma yad'unani ilayhi. Just think about this. I'm going to be a bit crude when I put it, but I just want you to just appreciate it. He says, Oh Lord, prison is better than sex with this great woman. This one of the most beautiful women in Egypt. Does that make sense? Prison? He doesn't say it's more logical. He says it's closer to my heart. It's so clear to him that his emotions want to take him, his emotions, not his mind, his emotions want to take him to prison instead of pleasure. What does he do in prison? You would think he would just sit and feel sorry for himself. He starts teaching them. That's a chance to teach. He starts to teach the other prisoners. Talks to them about his Lord and the bounties. He talks about the bounties of his Lord, and he is in prison fearing for his life. And then one of them ends up in the household of the king, and he forgets about him, and he remains rotting in that prison for years. Then they come back. Does he say, why did you forget about me? He helps. He provides, by those days, scientific knowledge, because he managed the operations of producing and maintaining their grains, which was very important. That was food. Essentially, he was a supply chain guy. He was managing the operations of storage. And he went from prisoner to an innocent guy. He was accused as well. His reputation was tarnished. He's now innocent. He's now the deputy, the prime minister effectively, of that huge, very important part of town. And then towards the end is the verse that I started with. رَبِّ قَدْ آتَيْتَنِي مِنَ الْمُلْكِ وَعَلَّمْتَنِي مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ فاطر السماوات والأرض أنت ولي في الدنيا والآخرة توفني مسلما وألحقني بالصالحين. Even after this whole end, his success, when he's asked, he doesn't say, I did it myself, I'm amazing, I'm really good, I managed the situation. He looks at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and says, you gave me this. You gave me this position of authority. You've protected me throughout the way. You've helped me. And so I'm now grateful. And Tawaffani Muslima. The infallible prophet is praying to his Lord that when he dies Muslim, he dies a believer, he dies on the right path, so that the rewards continue. I mean, he knows he's infallible. But it's still, knowing that you're safe doesn't mean you shouldn't be grateful, as our Prophet says. أَفَلَا أَكُونُ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. They ask him, why do you pray? He says, well, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven your sins, he says, well, shouldn't I be grateful? Shouldn't I be thankful? And this is Yusuf, somebody through this. What I wanted to show is that this is the legacy of religion. This is the recipe. A person who has emotions and logic and rationality. Somebody who goes through challenges. They go through up and downs. Those who maintain their stability and their mindset and their clarity and work hard and produce will succeed. And those who don't will fail. Fail either visibly to us in this life, or fail, look rich and happy, but in reality they're miserable, or think they're happy, but they have no success after the Day of Judgment, when it matters for eternity. And this is how the equation is structured. And you see how Islam, kind of a final point to transition tomorrow, inshallah, into kind of when we have more than one person in the relationship, so kind of groups, small groups, friendship, marriage. The one issue that remains about societies and biases and understanding and cognitive issues and the concerns that sometimes we Muslims have or we Muslims face is the question of gender equality in Islam. That in society, how has Islam dealt with this? Are women and men, do they suffer from same biases, or are women just emotional and men are logical and rational and good, and women are just emotional and not so good, less capable, as many try to put it? Essentially, is there a difference? First of all, scientifically, empirically, there is no difference in terms of system 1, system 2 balance. But more importantly, we need to understand where we are. By the way, we are in more than 1400 years after Islam. In the civilized first world, still women doing the same jobs get paid less than men doing the same jobs. Here in America. On average, they get paid less. And there is an important point here to mention, that the world we live in is quite different to the world Islam designed it. The world we live in is a world designed by those who are powerful in society, and those who are powerful in society are men, by definition. So it's a world where men have an inherent advantage to succeed. It's just the way it is. It's just the way a game is. So it's a game designed by men for men, where women are requested to compete. They're less likely to succeed, they get paid less, and this will continue. What Islam does is something very different. I'll talk about this a bit more another time. What Islam does is something very different. Islam says we have two units to society, not one superior, one less superior, not one unit. Our Western world talks about almost mathematical equality, that there is one version of human. One version of human. Everybody is on par, and everywhere there's one version. Compete. But compete in what? In an aggressive banking culture. Of course women are going to lose, because it was designed in an environment where people operate that way. But we don't reward. Look at the high-paid jobs. You don't find jobs that women consistently do better than men. There are jobs where women do consistently better than men, but they're not high-paid, because that's how the game was structured. It's a flawed system, which obviously will lead to flawed results. Islam does it differently. Islam says we have males and females in society, and that each have their own strengths and weaknesses, and that the best unit, the best successful recipe is to have an integration. It's a bit like how we form companies. A company is not a one person, a company is a unit, where you bring in people with different skills, you form a team, and the team, the sum of the team, the output is more than the sum of the parts, essentially. You put 1 + 1 equals more than 2, kind of analogy. And that's how Islam structured it. And so when we plan our lives, our projects, when we think about it, we need to have this in mind. This is not to say one should work and one shouldn't work. This is not to say one should stay at home and one shouldn't. That's not what it is at all. It's to understand that we are inherently weak, all of us, that we can be better when we integrate, that we shouldn't divide every task in half, that we should specialize. And recently now, when people give career advice, they say, in your career you should really be looking to specialize, to control some resources, to have some special value that only you can add, so that you'll be valuable to the organization. That's what actually we're being taught at the moment. They say, have some unique value so that you're not replaceable. Islam says in the family unit, everybody should have unique value so they're not replaceable. If you say everybody does the same thing to the same quality, essentially everybody is mediocre, because nobody can be good at everything. So instead of moving from being excellent in multiple dimensions, we move to being average in multiple dimensions, you'll be replaceable. Islam did it a long time ago and did it very differently. And you see where Islam started. Humanity then, women were a commodity, bought and sold, literally bought and sold. traded. So if tribe 1 attacked tribe 2 and there was a problem, they settle it by giving, sorry about this, by giving cattle and women to settle the dispute. That's the backdrop where the Prophet started. Lineage is all about men. That's what mattered. Who you are, where you belong to. Why? Because society was all about looting and fighting and killing. And men can kill better than women. That's it. And so what Islam did, changed this concept completely, reversed it completely. Turned these individuals with their skills, with their attributes, and created something quite different. And fought it head on, until it changed the balance. And you notice something very unusual with the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. I'm saying this because I want to show you that everything in religion is there to serve a purpose. It's there by design. And if we understand that purpose, great. If we don't, we shouldn't dispute it. Right? Evidence, rationality leads us to a comprehensive religion that we should accept. It's a manual. Who can design a better manual than the manufacturer? Who can give you a better manual than the manufacturer? Well, the Creator gave us this manual. And this manual contains information. So if you sit and buy a device and they say, before you turn it on, do X, Y, Z, you may understand the chemistry and physics of it, you may not. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, you should just do that. There's a reason why a car manufacturer says you should do a service every time the indicator turns on or every so many thousand miles. There's a reason. They've calculated it, the engineers have calculated it, they've come up with an answer, right? Now, sometimes we understand the mechanics of it, sometimes we don't, but we should accept it because it's coming from an expert. What if it comes from an infallible source, an absolutely correct source? And so, in my approach in these nights, I've tried to show you that what science is teaching us now, which we should take and adopt and learn from, because that's what our religion teaches us, to accept knowledge wherever it comes from, that our ancestors who were believers benefited from the same stuff 100 years ago before science discovered it. And there are, crucially, other things in our religion which will be beneficial, which are beneficial to us now, which science will prove in 50 or 100 years. But we are, if we follow, we are ahead of the curve. We have an advantage. We have a first mover advantage. And you see, the point I was building towards, how Ahlul Bayt, how Islam did something very unusual. Lineage is so important to that community. It's all about who your sons are, how many you have. They had a special name if somebody had 7 children. If you have 7 sons that are kind of sturdy and strong, not necessarily intelligent, sturdy and strong, you have a name. They give you a special word. Like, you know, you've made it. You've made it. This is the mindset. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a messenger who has sons who die. His lineage comes from a woman. You see the shift in mindset? He says, this man who has proven himself to be the best of you, and you accept it 100%, the best, his lineage comes from a woman. Who can challenge that? So even the likes of Banu Umayyah and Abu Sufyan and Muawiyah, they don't even claim to be better than Hassan and Hussein. They just don't even dare say it. But Hassan and Hussein their connection to the Prophet is through Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And today in this world we have Sada. The only connection we have to the Prophet through lineage, which is important, is through this lady. You see how practically you change mindsets? The other event, the other major incident that shook the Muslim world, that resonated and reverberated and was very important, as we know, is the events of Ashura. And so you see, Ahlul Bayt does something very clever and very efficient with Ashura. There are only a limited number of them, 14 infallibles. It's a small number for a long period of time. Well over 1,000 years already, and we don't know when Al-Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallahu Farajah will come back. How can you have so much impact with so few people who have to teach religion and science and knowledge and do so many other things? How can you minimize the amount of sacrifice but maximize the impact? I mean, every sacrifice is huge. If we're talking about Hussein and his household, it's unimaginably huge. But how can you amplify it? How can you have something that is so important that would change societies in the decades, in the generations to come, yet not kill the whole of Ahlul Bayt, because you still need them to teach? When Hussein led the revolution and shook the state was in a state of shock. Imam Zayn al-Abidin was teaching. By the time they realized what he was doing, Imam al-Baqir was doing something else. They completely changed, they gained themselves a permanent advantage. That's why they managed to teach so much when all eyes were on them. And this required a sacrifice that can be amplified, that can remain, that can have a long-term impact. And such a sacrifice needs pillars. It needs a huge shock to the system, but it needs to be talked about. If it happens in the desert in Karbala and nobody knows about it, what's the effect? What's the impact? And so strategically, Imam al-Hussein took steps, very clever, calculated steps to maximize the impact. And then Imam al-Hussein dies. So what happens? How does he know that the message is conveyed? How does he know that success continues? It's built on two people, a man and a woman. Imam Zayn al-Abidin and Sayyidah Zainab. That was the revolution which benefited humanity so many times over. It was conveyed, the message of which Imam Zayn al-Abidin had limitations. He couldn't say everything. He couldn't be the face of it because he would be killed easily. What Ahlul Bayt did cleverly, they used this society bias. Society found it hard to kill a woman than kill a man. So they said, well, women just as capable. We'll put Zainab and she will deliver the message. Zayn al-Abidin will say some things when he can and she will say things when she can, and the two of them will make sure that the message of Hussein is conveyed as far and wide as possible, so that Zayn al-Abidin and al-Baqir and al-Sadiq and others don't have to lead another revolution. They just need to remind us of it. They just need us to sit in Muharram and commemorate. One was enough. What they needed is to institute this system that we follow. This is not random. This is an institution led and designed by Ahlul Bayt. They used to sit like this. They used to sit like this and have a poet who will recite poetry, and men and women, Ahlul Bayt, the Imam, and he used to say, put a curtain, and then his women and family would sit, relax behind the curtain, and they would cry. So he balanced it, they balanced it that way, which shows how much faith and Imam al-Hussein had in Sayyidah Zainab, how valuable he saw her role, how much trust he had in her. And history tells us the conversations they had up to, from her young age. She was born in the household of Imam Ali, and she was trained from a young age that one day, Zainab, one day, you will be in that position where you will need to deliver. And this continued. So Imam al-Hussein was talking to her as almost a partner in revolution, telling her what she needs to do, telling her that in times of adversity she still needs to maintain her calm, she still needs to convey the message, she still needs to take responsibility for the women and children, she still needs to cope with the death of her brother, her other brothers, Alabbas and his brothers, their children, her own children, Sayyidah Zainab had children killed on the day of Ashura, and still maintained that leadership role because he counted on her, and her role was really important. And so, as we built towards the day of Ashura, in that eve, Imam Hossein calls Zainab. She hears him recite poetry, signaling this is the end for him. And so he calls her in and he tells her, this is what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to prepare you now. You will see those children, those beautiful faces, those names that you know. You will see them head to the battle. You will see them get killed. You will see them die thirsty and hungry. And you will be expected to exercise patience. You'll be expected to control the situation. And so on the day of Ashura, they go one by one. You know what legacy was? They go fight, they get killed. Imam al-Hussein goes and brings them back to the tent. To the tent where Sayyidah Zainab is. And she was receiving them martyr after martyr. Beautiful face after beautiful face. Child after child. Brother after brother. And they would come back to her tent and she would see them. And she would have to come and control and manage the situation with the women and children. And then it was the Imam al-Hussein, he was the last one, he was going to battle, and she would see him, and he would say his goodbye to his children, to his family, and Sayyidah Zainab watches. And then Imam al-Hussein goes to battle and falls to the ground, and Sayyidah Zainab watches and sees him there struggling. And then the army surrounds Imam al-Hussein, and he has no support, and she's watching. And they slaughter Imam al-Hussein, they sever his head, they put it on a spear, and Sayyidah Zainab is watching. And then she goes next to that body and says, Allahumma taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban. And then she goes through the turmoil, heading to Kufa as a prisoner of war. This daughter of Imam Ali, daughter of the Prophet, daughter of Sayyidah Zainab, is a prisoner of war, where people say derogatory words to her, where she's fearing for her life and the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin. And she goes all the way to face the enemy, that's Yazid, holding the severed head of Imam Hussein and mutilating it, and she has to watch and has to defend. And he says to her, who's here supporting you? Where is your dad? Where is your family? And she has to be in control. And then she comes back with the family via Karbala, and she goes to the grave of Hussein, and you can imagine what she would say, what she would be thinking sitting by the grave of Hussein, saying, this is what you left me with. These are the memories that I had to struggle with. This was my experience, oh brother. And then she heads back to Medina. Imagine what's like to go back home. She left home with Hussein, one of the greatest leaders in the community, and now she's back home to an empty house, to women and children to be looked after. Who she sees there? She sees al-Baneen, the other woman who's lost sons, and they sit and weep. And that was the legacy of Ahl Bayt. For a long time, a woman comes in and they open the door and somebody sits and they remember and recall. And there are so many of these painful tragedies that Ahl Bayt went through that it's so hard to describe. It's so impossible for us to understand their suffering. Yet, they managed to deliver something so special that so many hundreds of years later, well over 1,000 years later, you and I can follow it as a guiding light. And this is the beauty of that story. This is the beauty of their success, however painful it was, however huge the sacrifice is. And this is the example that you and I, brothers and sisters, need to emulate. At the end, let us pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He may give us the clarity to rely on Him, to rely on His support at times of adversity and opportunity, to understand that nothing in our lives can happen without His guidance and support, that we rely on Him and connect every moment of every day, that it is by His support that we succeed, and that we always know if we are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be rewarded much more than we deserve on the Day of Judgment. Sisters, brothers, let us pray to those who are amongst us and everybody else who is in need of dua, for those who are ill, for those who are in need for many other reasons. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward everyone, accept our deeds, support us to be on the right path. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين.